Yes, I've emailed him to advise him that because he's sending a substitute, he needs to send his comments via the substitute, so by you essentially.
Hello, everybody. Sorry to cut across various conversations in the room, but I've been told that we can make a start now. So welcome everybody to the Council Executive, those in person, those watching at home and those watching afterwards. It's nice to see more people back, and this is our first executive meeting with all members of the executive back, including members of the public and some officers. I know you definitely don't want an echo through the whole meeting, but it's nice to see you all here. We've got a number of items of business today and a number of registered speakers. So I'll get through the business as efficiently as possible, whilst obviously giving everything full consideration. At this stage, we just note any apologies. As I said, all members of the executive are here. We've received apologies from Councillor Kilbane, but he sent Councillor Douglas as his substitute, so welcome to the meeting. First agenda item is declarations of interest. I'll just give a couple of seconds in case any colleagues want to declare any additional declarations. If not, there are none to declare. Item 2 is the minutes of our previous meeting, which are set out at pages 1 to 6. And again, I'll just give a couple of seconds in case colleagues wanted to raise any issues. If not, I suggest that we'll sign off those minutes as a correct record. So as long as I see some nods and nobody is shaking their heads in the other direction, we'll sign off those. So thank you very much. Item 3 is public participation. As I mentioned at the start, we have 9 registered public participants, as one has had to withdraw a little bit before the meeting. We are struggling to get one of the participants on the phone, so I'm going to change the order to give her maximum opportunity to join towards the end of the public participation slot, but just so everybody knows. Each public participant gets 3 minutes to speak to us. The first public participant, and I should say apologies if I pronounce any of the names incorrectly, but our first public participant is Jane Burton, who is here on behalf of York Accessibility Action Group, regards the negative impact of Foot Street's extension on disabled residents. And Jane, you have 3 minutes to talk to us, and I'm assuming it's at the one of the, oh no, on Zoom. This is when this world of getting used to phone, Zoom and in person. Can you hear me, Jane?
I can, yes, thank you.
Great.
Thank you for letting me speak.
You've got 3 minutes to speak to us.
Okay, thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of York Accessibility Action Group on agenda item 5. We have formed as a direct result of the Foot Street closures. The petition close to us, which was founded by Alison Hume, now has over 1,500 signatures. This is the 3rd time I've spoken. Before the COVID pandemic and the subsequent changes to the Foot Streets, I didn't have to spend time writing and speaking about disability issues in York. I was proud of the city I lived in and happy to live here. Now so many residents and visitors are cruelly excluded from the heart of this beautiful city, its shops and services. Disabled people now have to go out of town or to other towns such as Leeds and Harrogate to go shopping or access services. The mark of a civilization is how it cares for those who are disadvantaged. And so what is currently happening here is a poor reflection on the city of York. There seems to be a woeful lack of understanding and awareness about the needs of disabled people. Following the last council meeting, comments on Twitter from shocked members of the Green Party across the country highlighted that these exclusionary practices in York by the Green Party were not shared by others in the Green Party. They made the strong point that environmental protection and concern was not to happen at the expense of the disabled community by excluding disabled blue badge holders. There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding about the use of cars by disabled people. People need their cars for a variety of reasons, including as a refuge and a place where medical equipment can be stored to use among many other things. To obtain a blue badge, people must undertake a vigorous application process and are only granted a blue badge after the authorities are sure that a person qualifies. To be entitled to a blue badge, you can't walk more than 50 metres repeatedly and to an acceptable standard. Currently, the approximate distances to the post office from various proposed replacement parking spaces are much longer. The proposed space on Cumberland Street is 156 metres one way to the post office. From the Castlegate car park, it's 280 metres. And the post office to St Andrew Gate is 375 metres as the roads take you, not as the crow flies. You must also remember that you must double the distance as you must walk there and back. Throughout the report sent out about the latest proposal, there is continual use of stated mitigation for the loss of parking for vehicles of blue badge holders with streets where the parking is dual use, and this has been criticised in every piece of consultation as unworkable, and there have been numerous complaints to the council and DPOs. The council has also failed to heed the criticisms from numerous organisations and individuals regarding the cafe areas spilling out onto streets and making them further inaccessible. Consultation can only be considered as such if it is listened to and changes made as a result. Similarly, the council is not only excluding disabled residents from the city centre, but visitors from far and wide, along with those just across the boundaries in North, East and West Yorkshire. Thank you for listening to my speech.
Thank you very much for your comments and taking the time to speak to us today, Jane, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 5 later in the meeting. Our second public speaker today is Anne Norton, who is speaking on behalf of the York Disability Rights Forum and is also joining us via Zoom. Hopefully you can hear us, Anne, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, thank you.
Hello, we can hear you fine.
Great. I'm speaking on behalf of York Disability Rights Forum regarding agenda item 5, the City of York Council Recovery and Renewal Strategy. Buried within this agenda item is the ongoing issue of the Foot Streets extensions and how they continue to exclude disabled people. The Foot Streets measures were introduced last July as a pandemic response to allow 2-metre social distancing. National government is now at stage 4 with the 2-metre rule no longer in effect. Whilst the main concern of the council seems to be to get York moving again and boost the local economy, they are still denying disabled citizens access. Disabled residents who have the same rights to access the city centre and its facilities as non-disabled residents. This lack of joined-up thinking is posing blue badge users as a problem to York rather than part of the community who should be included in any recovery plan. The main access issues include the distance of blue badge parking from the city centre, sharing blue badge parking spaces with loading and delivery vehicles, the need for easy access to a safe personal space, and street furniture and pavement cafes obstructing access for those with mobility or sight impairments. Without adequate enforcement and consequences, the street cafes remain a hazard to disabled users. To address the removal of the blue badge access specifically, we have already put in an immense amount of our time, health, energy and free labour into engaging with the council to help you understand why the Foot Street exclusions are discriminating against and excluding us. To hear that you are planning further consultation is deflating. This is no longer a new issue. There has been consultation for over a year now. Your own survey found that over 3/4 of blue badge holders disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement, "There is parking close enough to allow me to access the city centre." What is needed is for the council to treat this issue seriously, listen to the community and act on what we are saying. Shop mobility and dial-a-ride have already been discussed in the consultation, specifically in council Zoom sessions on 14th, 16th June respectively, and options for service improvement and expansion have been suggested. Whilst funding for these services is to be applauded, it needs to come alongside a commitment to allow disabled residents access to the whole of the city centre. Investing in these services will not remove the need for blue badge parking in the centre and will still require investment in other measures, e.g. dropped curbs, improved signage, etc. It needs to be acknowledged that these two services cannot provide for all blue badge holders. The necessity of advanced booking, limited hours, cost are all prohibitive. The crucial point is that some people require their own specialised wheelchair and adapted vehicle, and the simplest way to allow for this is readily available and central blue badge parking. Spending thousands of pounds to make us more aware of these services will not make them into appropriate alternatives for the adequate vehicle access. Instead, the council can make a meaningful change now and at no expense by returning blue badge access to the city centre. The city centre we have been absent from for over a year and a half. Delaying the decision until November will not change the facts, just the extent to which we are excluded. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, which we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 5. Our third speaker today, and I will just check whether she's been able to join us, is Pamela Mills, who is joining us via the telephone, so hopefully this one will work. And that again regards the detrimental effect of Foot Street extension on blue badge holders. Pamela, hopefully you can hear me and you have 3 minutes to speak to us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, we can, yes.
Great. It's so detrimental for the simple reason that a lot of us only have a short amount of time with our carers, and to put all the parking spaces around the periphery, it doesn't give us enough time to find a parking space and then to go to either a meeting or whatever we're supposed to be doing, because it's happened to me twice already, whereas before, when we had Goodrum gates, I'd be able to go up, park up and do my thing in time for my carer to take me back home, whereas now, because of the one-way system, it takes absolutely ages to be able to have to try all the different little spaces that we can use, and then we ran out of time and I had to come home before I could do anything. And it's just gonna, and that's just me. And where there's only a couple of spaces in some areas, if there's a person who has a larger car, who has a hoist to come out the back, they take up nearly 2 spaces. So, you know, that's a problem. And I feel we've every right to be able to come into the city and use the facilities. Everything we do as disabled people takes a lot longer than if you were going to a car park, zipping out your car, locking your car, and if necessary you could walk really fast or run if you needed to get somewhere on time. We can't do that. We accept that the city floor, all the roads, are all bumpy and gnarly, but that's part of the history of York, but that slows us down. If my carer has to push me from the outskirts of the city, that is then adding even more time before we can even get into the centre of York. So I feel it is essential that you should still allow us to park inside the city walls, and like with Goodrum Gate and is it Collier where Barnett's is, it needs to have a larger amount of spaces like we had there. So I've never gone into York and not been able to find a space there. And because you're dotting them all the way on the periphery, it's just not working. Like the taxi debacle at Christmas, all the money that was wasted. And I tried to speak to people and explain what you'd arranged, how that was going to affect somebody who's in a lot of pain like myself. to be yanked in and out of a car and my carer having to lift my wheelchair in and out. I never went anywhere near the City of York when that was going on because it just wasn't going to work. And I understand that you want plenty of walkways because lots of people come to our lovely city all year round. But we've also got to be included in this because, you know, it's a beautiful city. The shops are small. It's a struggle for us to get in and around some of the shops, which then slows us down even more to achieve what we've come for. But we all accept that some of the shops are like that because they're really old buildings. And all we're requesting as disabled visitors into York, or, you know, like myself, we live here, is that we are given the same opportunity to be able to move around York and get to places that everybody else can do who are able-bodied.
If you could
hopefully, I've highlighted.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether it works when I talk over, but if you could draw your comments to a close, please. You've had longer than the 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, like I say, I've made my points across, and hopefully you could understand what I've been saying. So thank you for the opportunity to actually speak.
Thank you very much for speaking, and we certainly could understand what you're saying, and we'll take your comments into account when we get to agenda item 5.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Our next public speaker, if my notes are correct, is now in person, James Euston, who's speaking on behalf of the York Cycle Campaign on foot streets and city cycling data. James, welcome. And once you've got your microphone and everything set up, your 3 minutes will start.
Good afternoon. I'm here to speak on behalf of the York Cycle Campaign. We'd like to draw the executive's attention to two items. The first is paragraph 21 of Annex 2 from item 8. We have serious concerns about the data that is presented here. Officers claim that it is remarkable that cycling in York fell 84% of 2019 levels during 2020. We agree that it is remarkable to see such a dramatic fall when the Department for Transport Statistics show that the rest of the UK saw cycling levels increase by over 45% above 2019 levels. Rather than patting themselves on the back, we think that officers should be asking themselves why York didn't experience the huge rise in leisure cycling seen elsewhere. Officers then go on to exclude the 2020 data and instead trumpet an 8% increase in cycling levels between 2010 and 2019, a desperate attempt to pull some good news out of these damning statistics. The plot of cycling data presented to executive members in June this year shows a clear upward trend in cycling until 2014 and continuous decline thereafter. Officers failed to provide any context with this plot, such as York's increase in population of 8%, motor traffic a massive 23%, and collisions a terrifying 25%. We'd like you to ask officers why the city has not been able to retain the cyclists it gained up until 2014. Why have nearly 12,000 people given up cycling since 2014, despite York's growing population? The awful performance needs to be acknowledged so it can be addressed. The second item we'd like to draw your attention to is the Equalities Impact Assessment for the ongoing extension of city centre foot streets, Annex C of item 5. Paragraph 3.16 asks whether the extended foot streets proposal will enhance the use of sustainable transport. The assessment suggests that it is likely to affect how people travel to the city centre positively. However, absolutely no evidence is presented to back up this claim. We believe that extended foot streets will have a negative impact on the use of sustainable travel. Already, cyclists are excluded from the majority of the city centre, and by extending the no cycle zone even further, cyclists are pushed out onto busy and dangerous roads. In particular, the loss of Castlegate as a cycle street is being keenly felt. This was one of the last remaining ways to safely reach the city centre by cycle. The extended city centre foot street zone makes it virtually impossible to cycle directly and safely from one side of the city to the other, thereby discouraging people from using active travel for mid-distance journeys of 3 kilometres or more, the very journeys that are best done by cycle. This is just one example. We're incredulous that the majority of this flimsy equalities impact assessment has a weak or non-existent evidence base. We ask the executive to scrutinise this assessment and ask officers to provide robust evidence to back up their claims. Thank you for listening to our concerns.
Thank you very much for coming in for your comments today that will get taken into account when we consider agenda items 5 and 8 later today. Our next public speaker is Jamie Wood, who is registered to speak on disability access to foot streets, and you have 3 minutes once the mic is on to talk to us.
Thank you. I'd like to extend my thanks to the staff who've helped me to attend this meeting in person, which I enormously value. And I'd like to reflect on the good chance that the city centre offices are not within the foot streets area, since it would have been impossible for me to do so otherwise. So I would like to mainly speak about agenda item 5 and the serious impact the TRO is having on those with disability. I want to focus on 2 interrelated issues. Firstly, there's an extraordinary lack of evidence, or even indeed a coherent stated purpose for this scheme. The statement of reasons document for the council's removal of blue badge access indicates the importance of countering terrorism. However, this reasoning is barely mentioned in this document before you, perhaps because it suggests officers believe, in a startling inversion of their public sector equality duty, that vehicles displaying blue badges are the likely source of a terror incident. I'm one of the 60% of responding blue badge holders who was positive about the extended foot streets. This number is critical to the officer's argument in the equalities impact assessment. Yet I'm now speaking against this. Why? Because like many others, I assumed that all motor vehicles will be excluded. This is not unreasonable since the climate emergency has been declared by the council and it has committed to have a largely car-free city centre. Instead, I became aware during one of the consultations that it was only blue badge holders that were being excluded. And worryingly, the responses to this misleading question appear to be the only evidence in the equalities impact assessment. I bitterly regret that the way my responses to this question have been twisted, and I will not respond to any further consultations that the council has. Secondly, why is this important? I note with interest that in the combined documents on page 31, it says, I quote, "Case law has held that achieving such a balance is not a breach of the public sector equality duty and that there is no prescriptive way to evidence due regard." This vague statement presumably alludes to the judgment in the case of the United Trade Action Group Limited versus TfL, which was published on the 30th of July this year. I'd just like to read out a few points of this judgment. In paragraph 64 of this judgment, it notes the acceptance of the difficult balancing exercise between what weight to give to the mobility of the disabled and frail elderly against, in this case, a bus service. My question is, what is being balanced here? Cycling will still be banned in the foot streets, but not vehicles, and pavement cafes will still be on the pavements. For disabled persons, there is no balance. It's simply discrimination. In paragraph 78, there's a brief synopsis of evidence gathered to justify the objectives of the scheme. The City of York Council provides no such evidence. One obvious piece of evidence is lacking: the fraction of vehicle traffic which is in the foot streets who are blue badge holders. My freedom of information request to find this information out was due today. I have not received that information to present to you, I'm afraid. Paragraph 116 concludes a long discussion on the details of the TfL impact assessment. I contend that the impact assessment presented in Annex 2 would not meet the adequate condition that happened in the TfL case. The TfL focuses on the difficulties caused by a disabled person having to walk a one-way journey of 80 to 90 meters. Yet, as highlighted by a previous speaker, This, what you see before you in Annex B, indicates walks in excess of 250 metres, including to toilets and the main post office. It is absolutely contemptuous in this context to describe the impact assessment on persons with a disability as mixed. I question whether the document and the plans put before you by the officers would stand up to this level of scrutiny, and should it be challenged under the Equalities Act. And on that basis, I ask you to not accept this.
Thank you very much for your comments and for coming to speak to us today, and we'll take them into account when we get to agenda item 5. Our next public speaker today is Delma Tomlin, who has registered to speak regards support to music venues. And again, your 3 minutes, Delma, will start once you've got ready and pressed the microphone.
Councillors, good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm here as the Director of the National Centre for Early Music, but I'm also talking on behalf of the other live music venues in the city, specifically the Crescent, Victoria Vaults and Fulford Arms. Across the country, live music venues were among the first to close and of course are amongst the last to open up again. There's massive demand from artists to return to the stage, but before that can happen, there are a whole series of issues around audience behaviours and of course continued concerns about COVID restrictions and how we work through the complicated issues around travel and visas. National tours depend on a string of dates, which can easily be knocked out by any one member of the group being pinged or a venue having to duck out. And international touring at the moment is just a nightmare. COVID added to Brexit is not a comfy mix. To give you a concrete example, the NCM was only able to present its annual summer programme this July to an average audience of just 50, socially distanced by the regulatory 2 metres at the time, rising to 150 in York Minster. All non-UK artists were cancelled, costs reduced by squeezing the programme down from 30 plus events to just 4 days, an income boost through our online offer. But overall, we still lost 2/3 of our annual ticket income. Now, as we open for the autumn season, including the Christmas festival, we're still going to continue with some element of social distancing, which for us at least means 75% of our actual capacity. All 4 live music venues we're talking about are based in historic buildings, which are much enjoyed by our audiences. They offer quirky, independent venues, and they serve a wide age range and demographic, bringing light life to the evening economy. But these buildings necessarily need 24/7 maintenance, costs which continue whether or not we actually remain open for business. And all of them have issues around ventilation. Worries around costs are compounded by this very concerning reduction in the confidence of the audience. And certainly indications at the moment are that York audiences will take a while to regain that important confidence. And this in turn is exacerbated around these issues about national touring. In August 29, Victoria Vaults had 22 shows booked in and anticipated an income of just over 80,000. This August, 2 years later, they've struggled with a flurry of bands cancelling and currently have just 13 shows to sell and anticipate a reduction in ticket income of some 70%. The Crescent has already lost 10 potential shows this season and is facing a similar loss of confidence. All 4 venues are recognised by the Arts Council and all 4 are well run by staff who genuinely care about the city. And vitally, this is an opportunity through these ARG monies to help us without biting into much needed council resources. So many thanks for listening to me. I urge you to support them, but it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and taking the time to come and speak to us. And again, I know that we'll take those comments into account when we consider agenda item 5. Our next public speaker today is Christopher Sherrington, who is speaking on behalf of the York Music Venue Network and Music Venue Trust, and that is regards support to music venues. And again, you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
I thank the executive for its time today and ask them to take this opportunity to continue to support York's vital network of independent music venues through the use of the ARG funds in agenda item 5. This builds on the Council's and Executive's commitment in 2019, which recognised the importance that these spaces play to the cultural ecosystem and the communities of the city. On behalf of York Music Venue Network, Music Venue Trust and the Fulford Arms, it's been inspiring to work with Council to develop this proposal, which makes use of the ARG funding under the updated guidelines clearly set out by national government. This builds on work by other authorities, such as Manchester City Council, Stoke, Lambeth and Islington, and shows York City Council continuing to lead the way in creating cultural opportunities in the city and supporting the city's cultural strategy, which we're happy to help develop. This support will benefit not just these venues, but the broader pipeline of staff, creatives, artists, production businesses, accommodation providers, and other hospitality businesses. And most importantly, a diverse audience, both local and nationally, who rely on these spaces, which have already been identified by Arts Council as being integral to the cultural future of this city. It will also help these organisations to continue to develop new projects involving other partners, including York's academic and education providers and local community groups. These were the first organisations to close and the last to reopen. And unlike many other sectors which have been able to reopen back to or beyond pre-COVID levels, they continue to feel the after effects which will threaten to not just impact these venues for the coming 9 months, but also the very survival and the future of York's art scene. They continue to be faced with a number of challenges, including, amongst others, increased costs to deliver COVID-safe measures, a lack of national and international tours, as Delma pointed out, which has greatly reduced programming, staffing retention and event cancellations as a result of the pandemic, and reduced income due to audience behaviours. We also face a competition for artists and creatives across these venues due to the lack of national and international tours. The Music Venue Trust recently carried out a survey across its 900 members and found the following deeply concerning figures. 60% of grassroots music venues report their advance ticket sales are down. 61% report their turn up on the night is down. And 52% report that their bar income is down substantially by almost up to 30% in some cases compared to their pre-COVID-19 levels. These much needed funds will help steady these organisations and allow them to deliver a broad programme of safe events to benefit the city as a whole at a time when culture is most needed to help raise the well-being of its residents. Throughout the last few months, these venues have already worked together to deliver accessible events, both online and outdoors, and new exciting events alongside other partners in the city, such as York Minster and Bedden Hall, and help support creatives across the region. I ask that when it comes to agenda item 5, that the executive support this today and thank them for providing an example of how local government can support the creative and local economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, which, as you say, we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 5. And thank you very much. Our next public speaker today is Richard Poley, who's registered to speak regards agenda item 6, York Community Woodland, and that's with regards to the design of the new woodland with respect to Lowfields Farm in Rufforth. And you have, once the microphone is going, 3 minutes to talk to us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time today. I live at Lowfields Farm, Rufforth, and my home is directly alongside the southern end of the woodland area. As direct neighbours to the project, my family and I fully support the woodland project. However, we do have concerns of the potential impact it may have on our home in terms of outlook, nuisance and privacy issues. We have raised questions over the planned usage of the area to the west of our property with Paul and Laura in May of this year. To date, we still have no definitive answers to our questions, and we now find no mention of our concerns or recognition of our unique position as neighbours in the Pegasus report. I feel that planting in this area alongside our boundary needs to be of a shrubbery nature and managed to ensure our right to light is unaffected in the long term. Mature trees planted in this position would overshadow our property and block light, as it could be less than 15 metres from our house. Densely planted native shrubs would also create a buffer, allowing us a degree of privacy from the public visiting the woodland. At last week's stakeholder meeting, it was indicated that this area would have limited access. I'm afraid I find this a very loose term and would like further clarification. After all, we are the only direct neighbours to a 190-acre project and feel that our privacy and security is worthy of some respect. Finally, as a farm, we will have animals on our land, and it will not be appreciated if we find the public straying across the boundaries. Does the woodland scheme have provision for fencing or hedge planting to its perimeter to stop this potential nuisance occurring? And will the gateways adjacent to our property be blocked off to avoid public access at a point that isn't planned for this purpose? Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. And I know that we'll take your comments into account and I'm sure respond when we get to agenda item 6. Our 10th registered public speaker today is Councillor Looker. Welcome to the meeting. Councillor Looker has registered to speak on agenda items 8 and 9, in particular regards the adult social care budgets. And Councillor Looker, you will know what you're doing better than me.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to join an executive committee. It's quite a few years since I was last at executive. I remember your predecessor used to say executive would finish much more quickly if Councillor Looker wasn't here as opposition chief spokesperson. I make no apologies for that. I think it's one's role as opposition spokesperson to speak up. And I've come along today to speak up around the general finance and performance area of this council, and also to look back, particularly perhaps in my current role in adult social care. I seem to have mostly spent my city council life involved in the area that is now called people. And people are the most unpredictable and the most difficult to plan for. You can look at a road and by and large that road will stay there and not move very much. And the occasional hole is often possible to foresee when it's going to mature and become irreparable. People are not like that. People are definitely, they don't stand still for very long necessarily. And their demands can change and fluctuate very quickly and very suddenly in ways that we cannot always predict. And it therefore always makes budgeting for these areas particularly difficult. I have very often bemoaned the fact that unlike the great classic westerns, the cavalry very rarely come over the horizon to rescue local government. Local government under any government never seems to be a high budget priority. We are very rarely rescued. In fact, we are more frequently kicked in the teeth. And although I supported Councillor Runciman's plea to the Prime Minister when she made it at full council, that he should get his act together and sort out adult social care. At the time of the meeting, I said I was not holding my breath. I continue to not hold my breath that he will come up with any miraculous solution, let alone a financial solution. So we are confronted with the situation that is contained in the Finance and Performance Report, which will affect significantly the way this council operates. But the two areas that are always most vulnerable, and I know he isn't the chief executive, but he's as good as, is taking note of the fact that previous chief executives have often advised that the thing that keeps them awake at night is the possibility of some tragedy happening, particularly in children's services, but equally in adult social care services, if somebody dies in circumstances in which it can be shown that the council perhaps failed to act. And one of the things we have in our requirements, there are certain statutory performance guides which we must meet. And some of those are around the assessment of vulnerable people in a timely fashion, so that intervention can happen early. And I think all of us agree that early intervention is the best thing, because it will often prevent worse and more difficult situations and more expensive situations down the line. So I am concerned that we have got some significant areas within adult social care where we are having to acknowledge that that some things are taking longer than they should, that some things are perhaps not happening in as timely a way as they should. Are we able to support people leaving hospital in a prompt and receptive way? Are we able to give that early assessment for an elderly person to prevent them having to be taken into residential care? Are we able to give that support on a daily basis to somebody who is in some sort of need, who has a disability? Are we able to give them the fullness of life which they demand and deserve? And these are all challenges which are not going away, which are probably going to heighten with some of the post-COVID scenarios that are in front of us, where we don't know quite how long some people are going to remain significantly incapacitated. So I think these are a lot of questions which certainly the executive member for adult social care has to consider. But we are, all of us as councillors, responsible for those people in our care. We are all responsible for the children in our care. We are corporate parents, every single one of us, and it is important that we remember that fact, but it is equally important that we remember and take care of and look out for the elderly, the more disabled, the more vulnerable people within our society, to try and prevent them falling off the cliff. I am concerned for this council's abilities, and I think we need to look at ever more imaginative solutions and partnerships, particularly partnerships. I think we do need to stop being totally self-sufficient. We have to be brave and bold enough to go into partnerships where it's appropriate, just to make sure that the people we are responsible for, the people we care for, are well protected. So thank you very much. You see, I just go on too long. I did promise Carol I would shut up, but I failed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kerr, and we'll take your comments into account when we consider agenda items 8 and 9 later on the agenda. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all of our public speakers and those in person and those dialing in on Zoom and phone for your contributions, which are all appreciated, and I know we'll consider at the various stages of the meeting. The next agenda item for us to consider is agenda item 4, which is the forward plan, which is set out on pages 7 to 8. And again, I will give colleagues a couple of seconds to just check if there's anything they want to raise on the forward plan. If not, in a second, I'll wait for the different members of the executive to get back before I then just check if we're happy to accept the forward plan. So bear with us a couple of seconds whilst different public speakers exit the room, and then we'll come back to the forward plan. When Councillor Runciman and Widdowson will return at some point. Yeah. When they won't know that we're waiting for them. That will be the. Here we go. So I just said we'll wait for Councillor Runciman and Woodson to get back from helping people to leave. So we have the forward plan, and again, if I could see nods as to whether people are happy to accept the forward plan. So thank you very much for that. We'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is the recovery and renewal strategy, the August update. And on this item, I'll go to both Ian and then to Neil to present their respective aspects of the report. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just before I start, just a slight amendment to highlight in the report. So in paragraph 39, just at the middle of that paragraph, it starts with a sentence which says applications would be sought from individual venues, and it goes on up to the point where it ends infrastructure and buildings. We'd just like to change that so that it should read, applications would be sought from individual venues that previously received Cultural Recovery Fund investment from the Arts Council using the criteria from the Grassroots Music Venues Fund, (see Arts Council website), but without the restrictions on infrastructure and buildings. And we have sent that round in writing as well. So just to, if we could note that change, and we just need to record that when we come to the agreement or otherwise of the report. Just turning to the actual report itself, you'll note that this proposes that it's actually the last of the monthly reports in respect of COVID. You'll be aware we have been bringing these reports for some time now. It is an opportunity, I think, to just slightly reflect on what has taken place since March of last year. And I would just like to again record my thanks to all the staff for their huge efforts during that period of time across all ranges of activity. And it would be wrong to single any area out because actually it has been a whole council response. I would hope that all of those efforts are remembered. It's easy sometimes, I think, to forget things, and I don't think we should ever forget the efforts that council staff, plus all the different partners and volunteers and everybody has played during that time. That's not to say that COVID is over, it clearly is still here, and I think, as people will have seen, it is now very much about the country learning how to live with it. And clearly we hope there are no further major sort of spikes in terms of cases. But clearly cases will continue. And it's about, I think, how clearly society adapts and learns to manage that effectively. There are challenges clearly as we go forward, and you've heard about some of those tonight. And clearly there remain many challenges we'll need to consider as a council in terms of how we support business, how we support our communities, how we support in particular in terms of some of those critical areas working with the NHS. There remains very much a crisis still in the NHS, and that does affect a number of our services. The demand in that sector is huge, but there also, I think, remain opportunities though, and there are opportunities for York going forward. We've seen a very positive response in terms of the last few weeks, and I think that's what the council does need to equally focus on, is where the opportunities are to continue to grow jobs, support communities, and very much deliver a fairer and prosperous society. That's probably all I want to say. Obviously, there was a series of recommendations relating initially to the allocation of some funding into key areas, and we've heard tonight's reference to music venues, and there's also support to businesses through a voucher support scheme. And then there are a number of recommendations which relate to the foot streets, and Neil may wish to cover some further aspects of that.
Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you, Chair.
And I understand how important the Foot Streets issue is, and we've heard that this evening from speakers from the disabled community. I just want to make it clear to the world at large that all council car parks do have disabled facilities, that all our park and ride facilities do have disabled provision, and York is welcoming thousands of blue badge holders to the city this year. So please do keep on coming to the city if you are a blue badge holder. In respect to the comments from the speakers, I'm not going to attempt to go through them all in detail because the very nature of the recommendation in front of you this evening is that it's a temporary extension. Officers are not yet in a position to make a recommendation to you for the ongoing arrangements for the Foot Streets. And I note at recommendation G that there is recommendations for further engagement with those communities so that we can hear the concerns that they have with the proposals for the ongoing Foot Streets arrangements. I draw members' attention to paragraph E, the mitigations that we've put in place to date. Paragraph I, in the fact that we're proposing to put further mitigations in specifically due to the issues arising from cafes within the streets, to put more drop curbs into place so that the disabled community can access the main carriageway on either side of those cafes that have been licensed. There is also going to be an allocation of 20,000 of the COVID recovery money for the York Wheels and Dial and Ride and Shop Mobility, which we heard from some of the speakers that is, whilst welcome, we do recognise that isn't an entire solution. And clearly, under recommendation H, a further report will be brought back in November, at which time we will have listened further to the disabled community. We will provide members with a more comprehensive qualities impact assessment on the basis that will be an ongoing decision, and we will continue to endeavour to engage with that with the disabled community. In respect to the comments regarding cycling, I would like to make it clear that the council's priority is in accordance with its local transport plan. Pedestrianisation and cycling is our top priority. We, with the cycling community, would like to understand what it is that is taking people off their bikes. We clearly have a shared responsibility to make sustainable transport attractive, and we're more than happy to continue to work with the cycling campaign to understand the figures, understand people's behaviours, and work together to get people on their bikes and walking.
Thank you very much, Neil. I'll open this item for comments and questions. I'm sure different executive members will want to add. I think all I will say first is echoing some of Ian's opening comments, that I think this report shows the huge amount of work that has been done now over months and years, and that should be rightly acknowledged, whether that's council staff, the NHS, other key workers, businesses and volunteers. Everybody has done an awful lot that we should look back on and be very proud of as a city in some of the most difficult weeks and months that we will have experienced. And I think a lot has been accomplished in York, to name just a few, but certainly not an exhaustive list. Local contact tracing by our teams, one of the fastest paying local authorities on business grants, the emergency funds that were created very quickly, the 9 community hubs that were in operation, the return to education and all of the work that was completed to support schools, and really importantly, ever-changing but ongoing crucial services that were delivered for residents, including the reference to social care that was mentioned earlier. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to everybody involved in all of that, and an awful lot more in keeping those things going. In this particular report, I'd just like to quickly welcome the £500,000 for business support and the £100,000 support for live music venues, which will support our cultural recovery. I know colleagues will speak in more detail on particular aspects later. There are challenges ahead, though, for us as a city, but I think we all know that York has some unique strengths. So that community response to the pandemic, regeneration projects like York Central, our education and higher education sectors, which I am in no doubt will enable us to build back better, work together and be positive about working together through those challenges. And with that in mind, I'm certainly happy to support the recommendations that are included at paragraph 4. So I'll open it out. So if anybody does want to speak, please indicate, but I'll first go to Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. Just some quite brief comments, I think, on the mainly on the first part of the paper and the summary of the last 19 months. As you said in the paper, so many staff have gone above and beyond during that time to support York residents, and it is difficult to even name all the different departments and teams and to include everybody that has been involved in that. I just wanted from my portfolio area to say that I'm very aware that housing staff have been out there on the front line of all of this, supporting homeless people into accommodation, ringing around council tenants to offer help and support, linking people in with the community hubs and other advice and financial assistance, and much, much more. And I just wanted to add to that I think we're now seeing the post-COVID surge in demand on all aspects of housing services, certainly, and that's also being seen in other parts of the council as well, in terms of waste services, for example, and the number of enquiries that we're getting. And I'd just really like to take this opportunity to ask residents who've also been through a lot, but to be patient where they possibly can. There is a lot of pressure on staff. Getting problems resolved can be very frustrating at times, but it's good to remember that everyone, including council officers, the same as everyone else, has faced a lot of challenges through COVID. Some people are exhausted. Everyone's doing their best. A huge amount of good stuff is being done. Staff are working on ways to tackle the increased demand whilst also making services better in future. So I did just want to sort of mention that at this point. I'm also very aware in the paper of some of the really good things we've done, like in my portfolio area, also in the £1 million we invested in the York Financial Assistance Scheme that's been used in many different ways. I think we've really maximised its use really well to support people in hardship. And finally, as Neil said, I'm not going to try to respond to all the people who spoke. I've taken a lot of notes about the city centre issues and disability, but just as a city centre councillor, I did want to welcome the what's in this paper on the dropped curbs. I have had people contacting me specifically about that, so I'm really glad to see that we're doing that and that we are doing the shop mobility and the dial-a-ride funding. No illusions that's everything or it meets everyone's needs, but it is important steps forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gon.
Yes, thank you. And as has just been said, obviously we pay a lot of attention to the concerns that have been raised about the extensions and changes in the foot streets. I want to actually just acknowledge again the contribution of officers over the past year and more. I mean, in terms of our city centre, it is important really to reflect on, after the first lockdown, the way in which we responded really rapidly to the government guidance about helping businesses to reopen, to maintain that viability in our city centre. And I do believe that the prompt action, both in terms of financial support for businesses, but also enabling those cafes and payment arrangements to be put in place in a safe manner, has actually given people the confidence to come back to York, allowed those small businesses to keep trading, protected many jobs and local businesses, and kept that business confidence at a critical time in the face of a shift to the massive shift in behaviour to home working and more online shopping. So I think it's important to keep that in mind alongside our equally commitment to fulfil the duties, all the duties that we have as a council, everything from, as has been said, protecting public spaces from potential of vehicle and terrorism, to promoting the economic viability of the city centre, reducing our carbon emissions, and tackling this more difficult issue of accessibility for all within the city centre. And I would also just like to stress that whilst obviously there have been significant changes, the vast majority of the Foot Street area hasn't actually changed in terms of vehicle access. People, perhaps it's difficult to remember that going back, we made changes to protect Christmas markets pre-COVID. There were changes to the layout, which did impact on blue badge holders. And so we do need to address this, and which is what this report is actually talking about, trying to find a balanced judgment, which is why we're carrying out the most in-depth review of access within the city centre since the original foot streets were put in place. And I think certainly there will be more discussion and more opportunity for people to comment on the ways in which the measures we've been put in place can be reviewed and considered prior to our November executive meeting. So I sort of welcome people continuing to engage with that process and contribute to the discussion. But just to sort of really put it in context, as Neil has said, there are thousands of blue badge holders accessing the city centre, albeit that those who are most severely restricted are not able to do what they had previous to the extension, but the mitigation measures which we've already put in place, and those at which we're planning, are all seeking to address that issue.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to echo what the Chief Operating Officer said earlier about thanking staff and partners, everybody across the city, for the hard and extremely exhausting but very effective work that they have done over the past 19 months. And I think that the positives do need to be very much remembered. But I have to say that I found the need for our disabled community to speak yet again this evening on this issue so passionately, very moving and very disconcerting. And I do understand, as the Executive Member for Transport and Neil Ferris has said, that there are many thousands of blue badge holders who do still use the city centre. But I think that we've seen evidence this evening that there are people who are severely impacted by this and feel as though they are not being listened to and not considered. We've had Mr. Wood tell us that he won't participate in consultation again, which I think is a very poor reflection on us, that we shouldn't be accepting that residents won't participate in consultation because they don't feel listened to. And I can't accept that we are building back better when this change obviously impacts a portion of our community so heavily. And I do ask you all to consider that we have, over the months that this discussion has been going on, been reminded that there are examples of good practice around this, and Chester has been brought up many a time, a similar city to us in many ways, who are presented as doing a good job around this. And I really think that we need to make sure that between now and November, that this isn't a fait accompli, that things are really considered about how we allow access to the city centre for the most restricted, whether that's through mobility or medical need. And the distances that Jane Burton mentioned for blue badge holders in the first public speaker, the closest parking being 156 metres from the post office is something we really need to think about. So I do welcome so many of the actions that have been taken over the past 19 months, but I do think this is retrograde, and I think we need to think again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Neil, I don't know if there's any particular points there you want to respond to briefly.
I want to say that clearly there is an ongoing listening exercise. We are balancing, I think, as some of the members have said, but there are competing interests within the reopening of the city. I mean, when we talked about within the Equalities Impact Assessment about sustainable travel, an increased foot streets area will inevitably increase the amount of people walking around or who have the opportunity to walk around within the city. So we've got businesses that have come to rely on the cafe licenses that have been put into place, and the government have made announcements, and it's noted in the report that those cafe licenses are likely to become permanent within the legislative framework that we've got to operate as a council. So we are I absolutely acknowledge balancing the needs of different communities, and clearly part of what brings me to work every day is the fact that we do that in a democratic way, and we'll be presenting the best evidence we possibly can to you in November, but clearly reflecting that there is no such thing as perfect decision making, and you have a very difficult task as elected members on behalf of the people of York. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll speak this evening mainly on pages 20 and 21 of this report. Firstly, I'd like to thank officers and partners for their ongoing work in this crucial area, the crucial area being the Music Venue Support Scheme, as well as the work of wider cultural and music networks. In particular, I'd like to thank Chris, Delma, Harcrit and everyone else involved in the York Music Venues Network for their work and support in developing the proposed scheme this evening. The established partnerships through the network and the National Music Venues Trust, as well as the support from councillors of all parties, has been central in our support to the sector, recognising the importance and continuing challenges being faced by venues. We are keen to reinforce our joint commitment to supporting our vibrant cultural and music sectors. We have some fantastic grassroots music venues on our doorstep here in York. I'm glad we're able to hear from some today. As a city, we are rightly proud of our vibrant cultural live music offer, represented by incredible local venues and catering to all musical and cultural tastes. Whilst the past 17 months has seen our favourite venues close their doors to keep us all safe, it's been heartwarming to see the innovative ways in which performers and artists across the sector have adapted and brought their outstanding performances to the digital stage. Now that venues are reopening their doors once again, we are doing all that we can to support them as they adapt to face the ongoing challenge of COVID-19. Although live music venues have received grant funds from the Arts Council, support is now diminishing and venues are still facing a very challenging financial period, as we've heard this evening. Since our wide-ranging discussion on how best to support live music venues in the city back in October 2019, the pandemic has clearly reshaped the challenges faced by the sector. Whilst current priority of immediate financial help is crucial, active work will also continue on the broader issues and actions raised before the pandemic, including on the wider cultural offering, planning conditions and business rate constraints through existing networks, as well as the cultural strategy and partnership work across the city. The proposed scheme will extend support previously provided by the Arts Council through the Cultural Recovery Fund by making some funding available both to venues themselves, but also to the York Music Venue Network to best support venues and attract people back to enjoy live music again in our city. There are definitely going to be brighter days ahead for York's live music scene, but we're not quite there yet. And I very much hope that this support today will help venues revive live music in the city, bringing amazing talent and programming back to the stages for us all to enjoy again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much. I will focus on the support for businesses. The approach that we've adopted, the York Way, has been very much about working with the business community through this challenging time and developing tailor-made solutions which listen to them and are innovative. And I'm happy to see the proposed voucher scheme build on the success of this work that's fully audited. Must keep finance people very happy, but also flexible. And I think that's the way in which we've sought to work. As set out in the report, the recovery and support efforts are seeing York City Centre bouncing back, and there are businesses outside of the city walls, and they are doing very well too, but at challenging times. There's been a huge amount of effort to support those people who have lost their jobs, sadly, and that has resulted, as the Centre for Cities data, recognising that the increase has been amongst the lowest in the country, and that has not happened accidentally. There's been a lot of work from partners and a number of engagements for that. The positive data, as I mentioned, is as a consequence of proactive and strong partnership work with the BID, with the Federation of Small Businesses, Chamber of Commerce, Retail Forum, Indie York, the Traders Association, all of whom have given their time generously in a large number of roundtable meetings, and that's provided the evidence for the way in which we've been able to respond. The challenges are not over yet, as some of the earlier speakers mentioned, and therefore businesses are in need of further support to relaunch, pivot, seems to be a current word, and to refresh their offer as they adjust to the new economic conditions and recognise new opportunities. It's given many businesses the chance to think, well, the changes that we were going to implement in a few years' time, that has certainly sped up. So the proposal to use £500,000 for a voucher scheme for small and micro businesses in the city will build on the successes of the York Way and provide additional advice where it's needed most, allowing businesses to select the specialist one-to-one guidance and mentoring they need to flourish, strengthening business networks across the city and generating additional work for those local companies providing that advice, recognising there are teams that we have brought back or imminently from Make It York, but that those are limited in what they can do, and therefore this specialist advice is really providing additional time and information. So whilst at least 450 businesses will be supported by the scheme directly, many more York businesses will benefit due to the take-up of their services, and it will enable more business-to-business activity that helps the local economy flourish in a circular way, which again is a very topical phrase. But the cooperation and approach that we've established with partners will continue, and this is the next phase. So it's really about building on the success of the micro business grant scheme, which came at the last month in terms of how targeted investment, a relatively small amount, but it made a big difference to those small businesses. I'd like to comment briefly on the access and foot streets arrangements. That is clearly going to be a very complex issue to deal with. Local authorities will be required by government to support the cafe licenses and other changes that were brought in emergency comments from ministers, and we look to see what that statutory responsibilities finally work out at. And I recognise the work that's been done by teams to try and maintain that balance, that in some instances there's been a little more enthusiasm to expand more than was permitted, and therefore there has been a clear element of work done there to try and reach that balance, recognising that York's historic streets were not built with social distancing of 2 metres in mind, but it has been an evolving situation. So whilst we as an authority have responsibilities under the Equalities Act, and I fully expect that by November that will be worked into the report that's coming through to us, but the goal is to support an accessible, thriving and safe city which provides jobs and leisure opportunities that all residents can enjoy. And whilst it's not an easy one to achieve within the existing constraints, I do welcome the willingness to listen. I must declare an interest that my in-laws live in Chester, and they have been to York, and I think there's an exchange of information that's helpful, and I think that we as a city don't claim to have all of the answers, and I think there's learning to be done throughout. But I think what we have demonstrated in this report is that the evidence that we've had of previous schemes to support small businesses, we're going to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waller. Neil.
So apologies for those online who've just seen that I've received a text. It's very relevant. Mr. Wood made a comment about his FOI not being responded to. We've recently closed the statutory consultation on the foot streets, and officers have just confirmed they found his FOI in his consultation response, so they will be providing him with a response very shortly.
Thank you very much for that clarification. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 5. Obviously, just to acknowledge with that slight amendment suggested by Ian to paragraph 39 that I know has been circulated. And so with that amendment, are we happy to accept those recommendations? Again, if you could nod or show me your hand. Now we're in person, it's a slightly different. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting that recommendation as amended by Ian at the start. That then takes us on to agenda item 6, which is the York Community Woodland co-design vision and process for selecting capital funding and delivery partner. And this is going to be presented to us by Janie and Sean.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update to the executive on the progress made towards creating a new woodland for the city. It summarises the community co-design and engagement activity that's shaping the final woodland design, the efforts made to secure external funding to deliver the project and minimise calls on internal budget, and the process being taken to appoint a delivery partner to support woodland creation and ongoing maintenance. Since approval to complete the land purchase in August 2020, officers have undertaken a detailed site appraisal and programme of community engagement. Last winter, we launched our Woodland Memories social media campaign, in which residents told us what made Woodland special for them. This information, combined with the council priorities, was used to create our high-level project objectives. Early in the project, we successfully secured £110,000 of revenue funding from the White Rose Forest to provide staffing capacity and fund detailed site surveys. Using the feedback from residents and stakeholders and incorporating the site's existing physical features, we produced a series of concept designs to inform further community consultation, which took place throughout April and May this year. The consultation showed strong support for the Woodland vision, which is recommended to be taken forward with a minor addition to acknowledge the contribution that the Woodland will make to supporting our climate change ambition. The consultation process also asked for suggestions for a name of the new Woodland. Greater support was received for 3 options: York Community Woodland, York Wood and Knapton Wood. The current working title of York Community Woodland has been well received throughout the co-design process and has gained recognition. The concept of a community woodland also represents a contemporary view of woodland creation and clearly differentiates it from ancient woodland in the area. Feedback received through the consultation and our stakeholder advisory group has also shaped the final woodland design brief. This brief is to deliver the community woodland vision and show how the design meets project objectives following the community and stakeholder consultation, to be compliant with Forestry Commission's UK forestry standards, demonstrating best practice in woodland creation and management, to comply with eligibility requirements of our preferred funding options, and to deliver our agreed project success measures. The final woodland design is under development at the moment and will meet the criteria specified in this brief. Officers have also been working to secure external funding for the project to minimise calls on our internal budget. We shortlisted 6 potential funding sources and after an evaluation process identified the 2 options that most closely aligned with our own objectives, these being the White Rose Forest Trees for Climate Fund and Forestry England's Woodland Partnership offer. Following further discussion with both these organisations, I'm delighted to report that we've received conditional offers from both organisations to fund our woodland creation and management. Both offers align with our objectives, but there are noticeable differences between them. Officers are undertaking a final evaluation of these 2 offers before making a recommendation as to our preferred selection. As part of the engagement programme, we opened up a small area of the site on which we create a new wildflower meadow for temporary public access. The open space disposal notice required will ensure that we're compliant with relevant legislation, although the fact that the entire site will subsequently become open to the public means that this shouldn't really present any issues. The council's consistently met challenging project milestones, ensuring that we're on track to plant 50,000 trees by 2023 and achieving this at no additional cost to the council and residents. The tree planting season runs from September to March, and with notoriously fickle weather, we need to move at pace to ensure delivery remains on track. And this is the primary reason for the recommendations contained within this report.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Councillor Widdowson.
What a fantastic project. We bought the farm, and then through officers' diligence, we've found a way that central government will fund everything else. What a fantastic project, as I said. Our community woodland project started in February 2020. Since then, we've met all the extremely ambitious project timescales and milestones. Full ecology survey, archaeology survey, applications for change of use of land, applications about all sorts of things. And I'm delighted to see this project moving along at speed. Community is at the heart of this project, and it's been brilliant to see residents getting actively involved, from sowing the wildflowers, helping to shape the future design, and naming the woodland. I'd like to thank all residents, stakeholders and partners who took time to engage with the consultation and the design process, providing feedback on the vision objectives and the concept plans, and guiding the final stage of the woodland design. I won't take time up now going through the expansive list of themes and messages collected, but I urge you all to take a look at Annex 1. It's a fascinating read of how interested all our residents and businesses are in this plan. The new woodland will be well-designed, biodiverse, green space, providing a place for peaceful contemplation and leisure for the people of York. We're creating a new stray for the city, the second largest one in the city, which will support our climate change ambition, enhance the setting of our city and make York an even greater place to live, work and visit. The successful progress of the woodland is a testament to our partnership working with local partners alongside the White Rose Forest and the Forestry Commission have ensured best practices in place throughout. And at this point, I really must thank the White Rose Forest. They have been superb in their expertise, in their guidance and in their support for what we're delivering. I look forward to receiving the report on the final woodland design, options appraisal, funding streams and the management, as well as the confirmation of the delivery partner at my decision session later in September. In the meantime, I would urge all those interested to continue to participate in the many activities that will be taking place on site, including walking tours as part of York Environment Week, tree planting and workshops. And just to answer the question from the resident who came earlier, we are finalising the plans, but we haven't finalised the details, so all of his concerns will be taken into account. Many thanks, and I thoroughly recommend this project.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendations in front of us on pages 53 to 55 as just endorsed. And if I could please see from colleagues if they're prepared to accept those recommendations. So thank you very much. That's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. So that takes us now on to agenda item 7, which is updating the council's adopted highway data and recording processes, and back to Neil.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to apologise to Executive and to Mr B, who is named in the Ombudsman report for the authority's failure to accurately maintain our online highway street data. This has occurred in some expired, life-expired software that we have. The report puts forward proposals to address that failure, put in place new software and put a team in place to make sure that all of the data on that new platform is accurate and reflects our written records, which have been maintained. The discrepancy was between the two record sets. So the recommendation is that we correct this error in respect of our public information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Councillor Duggan.
Yes, well, I very much welcome this report, and as Neil has said, the issue that has been drawn to our attention, this is a sort of comprehensive approach to resolving that matter, to put the necessary staff resource in and to take us forward. So I would like to support the recommended options that have been identified to resolve the issue and to ensure that our full records are brought up to date in line with what one would expect.
Thank you very much. Similarly, we have the recommendation in front of us on page 126, as endorsed by Councillor Gorn. If I could please see if colleagues are happy for us to accept that recommendation. So again, thank you very much. Clear consensus in favour of accepting that recommendation on agenda item 7. That then takes us to agenda item 8, which is the finance and performance monitor 1 that starts at page 141. And I'll hand over to Debbie to introduce that, please.
Thank you. So this is the first report of the year in terms of the covering the latest finance and performance information. The report highlights the main forecast variations, and in particular, we see that pressures in social care continue to be seen, both in terms of demand for those services and the cost of those services. And this combination of that increased complexity in adult social care cases, tired workforce, and those pressures that are being seen both in the NHS and community-based services that are all combining to create those significant pressures, particularly for adult social care as well as in children's. So clearly both COVID and social care are national issues. They're not they're not unique to York in any way. And work is ongoing to address these challenges. So we're currently, there's a cross-council project in place to help support adult social care over the coming months, and that project's looking at how we balance both the well-being of the staff and our residents and those kind of short-term costs versus the longer-term savings plans. Clearly actively looking to reduce costs, but in a planned way to avoid making any decisions that might have a detrimental impact in future. So, but given that we are still in a very uncertain position in terms of the recovery from the pandemic, the national and local economy, it's essential, really, and it's prudent to continue to put in place mitigations and cost control measures. So we do need to carry on looking at how we can bring down this forecast overspend throughout the year. I guess the only thing I'd say, the summary positions outlined in table 1 at paragraph 17. There are also 2 other issues that are included in this report. The first is that there are some outstanding debts that are being brought forward for formal write-off in line with the financial regulations. It's been a number of years actually since any debts have been brought to executive, but there are these ones in the report that do need to be considered and approved there in paras 23 to 27. And finally, there's an update on the outcome of the procurement exercise to award some new ICT contracts, and that's covered in paragraphs 28 to 33.
Thank you very much. Open it to colleagues to any comments or questions. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair, and noting Debbie's sartorial choices and my button jacket, while we may be very well ventilated for COVID, it is actually quite chilly in here. Beyond that, getting on to the natures of the report, I think as Councillor Looker highlighted in her comments at the beginning of the meeting, we are facing significant pressures, and those pressures being around some of our most vulnerable adults, be that adults and children. £8.3 million at this stage is something that is significantly worrying and shows the effect that COVID is having and the pressures that local government finances are under altogether. I think, despite Councillor Looker's comment, it is probably worth noting that the big bulk of that, £6.5 million, is actually now in the children's area rather than the adults area, and that's the area that we're sort of focused on at the moment. I think that's because we have been working in the adult social care area for quite some time. I think on page 144, paragraph 8, that outlines sort of the significant work that has already been ongoing in this area to make sure that we're doing everything we can to bring that in within budget. I think, as you note, at paragraph 13, we did put £4.3 million of additional funding into the People Directorate this year alone, recognising the pressures that we'd already seen. And I think at page 156, when you look at the adult outturn as it is at the moment, it's significantly better actually than it has been for many, many years. So we are making strides in that particular area, but I think children's at the same time has started to get to be a more significant concern, and that's one of the areas we really are looking at. I know Councillor Looker did mention about being imaginative and coming up with new ideas. I think there is a note of caution in this report about some of those imaginative ideas. I think Debbie alluded to it. We see on page 148 the impact that imaginative solution of Be Independent had, having failed in itself and now leading to significant funding loss to the council. I think that is, by my reckoning, nearly all of those imaginative ideas from 2011 to 2015 that have had fee-figure costs to the council as a result of that. So while we do need to be bold and we do need to be imaginative, we do also need to be significantly careful. The one area I did want to highlight was around page 157. It's something that we often look at, the pressure that is on the mental health budget. I think that's something we all knew was coming during the COVID crisis, and I think it's worth reflecting that we did put additional investment in the budgets towards looking at some of that early intervention and preventative help, and I look forward to seeing the plans for that spending coming forward. I'll touch briefly on performance because I think it's very difficult to draw comparisons as we're coming out of the COVID period in terms of what's happening, but I did want to flag, as many people have also mentioned, the micro grants, the £1 million that we put in there. I think we had recent media coverage showing what a massive impact that such small amounts of money were actually able to have on some of those smaller businesses, and the people coming forward and saying that was really the difference between them being able to continue and not being able to continue. And I think we will really start to see some of those businesses thrive in the city, and that will be part of that, what drives our economic recovery. On probably a slightly more negative side, on page 162, paragraph 6, outlines some of the financial support that we've been able to give to residents as well as businesses. I think we're all well aware that a financial cliff edge is coming at this period in time as changes to universal credit, as changes to furlough, etc., will impact really significantly on residents, and that financial support we're able to give as a council, while not as large as we possibly would like it to be due to the restrictions that we have, will be absolutely crucial. And I know a report is coming to myself and Councillor Craighill shortly, looking at what funds we have available and how we can best use those. And we really want to work well with scrutiny in making sure that we get the best amount of impact out of the small amount of money we have. Go back to a slightly positive, as we always flag on, vacancies in our city shops continues to remain significantly lower than elsewhere in the country. And I think that's something we really need to reflect on, I think, as we are making our city centre as accessible as we possibly can. It is important that we still have a city centre for people to access. I think if we lose our city centre, then no amount of accessibility will allow people to get to what they need to do, because unfortunately they will have closed. Reflecting on one of the other speakers around the cycling issue, I'm not sure if I misheard or whether we misspoke, but it's sort of suggesting that there was an 84% drop. I think what the report showed was it was a reduction, a 16% drop. Levels were 84% of the base level, so it was not an 84% drop, it was a 16% drop. And I do support the growth in cycling, and I think it's a paragraph on a raft of statistics, and it's very, very easy to compare apples and oranges. And I think why some areas will have seen significant high levels of cycling during that period is because they had relatively low baselines, whereas York has had a significantly higher baseline for a long period of time. So there are a smaller pool of people who don't cycle to actually get into cycling, whereas if you have a very low 20-30% baseline, it's much easier to lift that by 10 or 15%. And then I've done positive and negative, so I'll probably end on the dull. Most people don't have changing their broadband supplier as one of their highlights of the year. It's probably there just slightly above doing your car insurance and home insurance renewal. But in this case, it's not just changing broadband, it's changing our MSA provider. And that is something that, while not all that exciting and glamorous, underpins absolutely everything we do. If we don't have the phone system, we don't have the IT system, and we don't have the Wi-Fi system, we're not able to do any of the really important work that we do. So that is one of the recommendations we have. So with that, Chair, happy to support the recommendations on page 145, paragraph 11.
Thank you very much, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just briefly like to return to what the representative from the York Cycle campaign mentioned and showed us the graph, which of course is very important, that since 2014 there has been a continuous decline in the number of people riding bikes in York, which he's absolutely right. We need to look at the systemic reasons for that. And I don't think that we've really acknowledged it, as he said, and taken a good hard look at what it is that has made our roads less appealing to cyclists. And this does go against the flow of data in the rest of the country, or much of the rest of the country. So I don't think we should get too excited at this point about our baseline and where we sit around that. I think we need to look at long-term trends and reflect on those and try and return our numbers to where they were at that peak. We should be trying our hardest around that. But to come back to where Councillor Eyre started around the significant pressures in social care, and I was particularly looking at the children's budgets. And as you say, there's an overspend there of 6.5 million, 3.5 million, of which are in placements. And this has been a long-running issue. This isn't new, is it? We've been looking at this as a significant overspend for many years, and has been highlighted for quite some number of years now. And I just wondered what we're doing to approach those issues that have been long-running in these areas, both adults and children's, because if we don't sort out some of those long-running issues, then our budgets are just going to go from bad to worse. And we have a very challenging period coming up where they need to be sorted out. I'd like to know what the executive member has been doing to identify these areas and actually put in measures that can start to reduce the pressures that are long-term systemic overspend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know Councillor Eyre addressed some of those points in his opening comments, but I'll just check, Neil, if there's anything you wanted to add regards cycling, and then similarly, I'll check with Debbie and Ian if there's anything they wanted to add in terms of that ongoing work in social care.
Just to say, I'm happy to work with all parties to understand the rationale for the reduction in cycling activity within the city. Clearly, the council has invested significantly in highways maintenance and cycling provision. We've worked with businesses across the city. I think within the last year, there's obviously the COVID impact. I think because of the significant numbers of commuters in York, Councillor Eyre is correct. No, that has a disproportionate impact in York. But clearly, just here in our own building, we've got thousands of cycle journeys a year not been taken in the last year by our own staff. So the last year, I think, is a clear anomaly, but actually understanding the trend is we're more than happy to work with anybody to start to understand that, because it's not that we've been undertaking activity that has been, shall we say, deterring cyclists. We've had a consistent investment programme, both in behavioural change and infrastructure to promote cycling.
Thank you. Debbie.
Yeah, in terms of the pressures being historic, that there is some truth in that, but I think it's also fair to say that the pandemic has intensified the challenges in children. So it's intensified the challenges that many children and young people face. And there are also other issues in regard to government funding for SEND, and I think we've seen an increasing reluctance by external providers to accept those children and young people who are at the very highest risk and with the most complexity, which has caused, significant cost pressures. So it's a mixture. It's not all historic. The pandemic has exacerbated some of those issues and made the overspend worse. In terms of what we're doing, the People Services sort of improvement programme, which I mentioned earlier, which is currently predominantly focused on just resolving some issues in adult social care, but that is covering the People Directorate. So we are looking across the Directorate. Put simply, we've got a lot more children and young people in care than we've budgeted for. So, and we need to establish whether that's going to be an ongoing position or whether that can be reduced back to a level that is at the budget. And if it can't be reduced and that's the right number, then we'll be including growth in next year's budget process to deal with that.
Thank you. Ian was going to make a few comments.
Yeah, I mean, I just echo what Debbie said, but just to add, we've also have put some additional resource in terms of commissioning, and that is something which linked to what Debbie said. We will be looking actively at how the marketplace is operating and how we are operating in terms of commissioning, because Debbie's absolutely right in terms of the numbers. So we've got to somehow drive best value out of that, but we are restricted at a minute, and just in terms of how the market is operating a bit. So it's not an easy one to look at, but we absolutely are looking at it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Councillor Runciman just to keep us moving on that topic, but we can always go back, and if we need to. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. Some brief comments, if I may. First of all, anybody that thinks that the pressure is off hasn't looked at my department. Pressure is still on in adult social care, as we've been reading, and it certainly is in public health, who are preparing for vaccinations for flu and top up COVID in the autumn. I want to respond particularly to a few of Councillor Looker's comments. We have strengthened safeguarding in the department with the reorganisation that's been going on, and I am quite confident that our safeguarding efforts, as it were, are good and strong and will remain so. Our partnerships are very strong, particularly with the community and voluntary sector, and I'm quite sure that that will continue. The executive, as Councillor Eyre has said, has put extra funding into adult social care and into mental health in particular. These were problems that we saw was coming, and they are being funded because of that. But I do want to finally say that budgets in health in particular are very circular, and you can see that on page 144 at paragraph 7. We tried to take some of the pressure off the hospital by getting people out of hospital early and putting them into appropriate places where they could recover and then go home with support. And what then happens is that puts extra pressure on our adult social care budget. And that's a very common problem in health and adult social care. We help one area and it puts extra pressure on another. That's why we're working together with the integrated care system to try and rationalise what we're all doing and support each other. So I must assure everybody that adult social care, like public health, is doing all it can to help the residents of York and keep the services going. And I'd like to support the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. One thing just to add to that conversation is we did discuss at the Outbreak Management Advisory Board this week the pressures on the whole system, health and social care, and the corporate director gave some examples of funding streams nationally that were at risk that would add further pressure onto that system, and we agreed as an outcome from that board to lobby the Department of Health through the LGA, through the Association of Directors of Adult Social Care, as much as we could to make sure that the particular issues that we were experiencing in York were heard and that we got that across, which is something I know cross-party we all agree on, and we should do everything we can to make sure that is on the radar nationally as much as is possible. We've got the recommendation in front of us on agenda item 8, and if, as before, I could just see if colleagues are happy with accepting that. Thank you very much. That's a clear consensus in favour of accepting that recommendation. On agenda item 9, it's the capital programme, Monitor 1, and back to Debbie.
So again, this is the first monitoring report of the year, and it sets out progress in delivering the capital programme. And there continues to be a significant level of investment in a wide range of schemes. There is also in this report a fairly high level of slippage, but this is due to some reprofiling of major schemes to match the latest expenditure profiles. And I think that's as would be expected with such complex schemes, but I have no other issues to draw to your attention.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. And again, just to flag the significance of this report, despite the fact it's always on the end, it's 158 million we'll be looking to spend this year. That's over 20 million more than is actually spent in the revenue budget, given the length of time we often spend talking about that. Page 183 to 187, there is extensive detail about the work that's happening in housing. Whether my colleague Councillor Craig wanted to talk about that, I'm not sure, but for myself, welcoming, for example, the £500,000 of funding that's going in to help with sleepers, the continued success of our shared ownership scheme, and the completion of the Marjorie Waite Court, which is another step in our massive transformation of the way we look after older people in the city from the old people's homes that we had in the past. The two from sort of my particular area that I wanted to flag were the continued progress on the Guildhall. So I was lucky enough in certain ways to visit the Guildhall the other week. I think I was invited along to have a look at the work of local tradesmen. If I'd known that it actually referred to what they said at paragraph 36, the re-roofing, and involved climbing about 15 ladders of scaffolding to get into the roof of the Guildhall, I might have turned it down in the first place. But having braved it myself, as someone who's not great with heights and got all the way to the top, it was fantastic to see the work that's done, and it's unfortunate that not many people will actually see the Guildhall roof and the closeness that we were able to, because the level of craftsmanship that you don't often see in areas like this as it possibly is was absolutely fantastic to see, and we're getting ever closer to completion. That really will be a fantastic asset to the city. And the second one, I think it never seems to go away, but the community stadium. So it was fantastic to see the news this week that capacity has been agreed to be increased up to £4,000 with 2 very big games over the weekend. Hopefully we'll be able to get 8,000 people across the 3 games with the night's double header across the weekend. And also the fact that we are progressing forward with the play area, which is the final piece in the puzzle, which will be, again, another fantastic asset. So with that, Chair, happy to support the recommendations on page 181, paragraph 3.
Thank you very much. Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Yes, just briefly, since there is quite a substantial report in the paper about what's happening in housing. I just wanted to note really that despite all the challenges, we've been making progress on major refurbishments in council housing. You can see that on page 184, the whole list of different aspects, kitchens, bathrooms, windows, door replacements, etc., etc. I'm really pleased to see that we're starting to incorporate energy efficiency works into that mainstream modernisation work, which is something that we really need to do as part of our approach to retrofit. And then also just to highlight that the housing department has been doing quite well at getting additional funding, 469,000 from the government's rough sleeper accommodation programme, which is contributing to purchasing 6 supported living move-on properties, as well as it includes revenue funding for a support worker, and this will enable us to provide concentrated support that will help to move people from rough sleeping into settled accommodation, particularly when these are people for whom other support options are not really working. The housing teams have also won over £2 million of the continuing part of the government's Green Homes grant to improve energy efficiency in the private rented sector through a range of insulation measures, and also some of that will also support work on the council's own retrofit programme, and fund some projects by a couple of housing associations. So that's very positive. And of course, the housing delivery programme is continuing to progress despite a bit of slippage through COVID, as Debbie said. But homes are being occupied at Lowfield and Duncan Barracks and Burnholme are now moving to procurement.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gaulle.
Yes, just with reference to the previous comments about cycling, I wanted to draw attention to paragraph 30, which refers to the £1.43 million investment from West Yorkshire Combined Authority for the sustainable transport improvements on Tadcaster Road, and the consultation for that started this week and I think concludes on the 19th of September. So there's a detailed package that's been put forward there, and I would urge those members and listeners who use that route to have a look at those and to see whether or not they feel that the measures that are being put forward there will actually help to make cycling and walking safer and more attractive. So it's open for consultation and comments, and hopefully once we get the detail of that back, then officers will be able to review those comments with a view to the work taking place at the same time as major maintenance work. I believe it's sort of January, February, early in the new year, when those can be measures can be put in at the same time to minimise the disruption of the work that's taking place.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendation in front of us on page 181. Can again, I see from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations. Thank you. So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. That takes us on to agenda item 10. I will just check with Fiona, but as far as I'm aware, there is no urgent business. So thank you all very much for coming, for bringing your jackets and coats rightly to keep the windows open, and similarly again to thank the public speakers at the start and those watching after the meeting. See you next time. Thanks.